Night slowly descended upon the city like a heavy blanket, immersing its streets and buildings in twilight. In the old, abandoned part of the city, where few ventured, stood a grand yet ominous mansion. No one remembered who had built this house, and even the oldest residents couldn't say when its last occupants had left. However, everyone knew one thing: this house harbored something ancient, something wrong, that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up when you got too close. Maxim, a 30-year-old journalist from the local newspaper, never believed in such tales. Throughout his career, he had encountered numerous urban legends, which, in his view, always turned out to be mere products of people's imagination or attempts to obscure the truth behind mysticism. But one story kept returning to his mind, no matter how much he tried to ignore it. It was about that very mansion on the outskirts of town. People said that strange whispers could be heard from its windows at night, though the house had been abandoned for years, and those who dared to get close to it claimed that something inside them broke something they could no longer explain. After hearing these stories, some went insane, while others vanished forever, as if the house had swallowed them up. Maxim had always been skeptical of such rumors, but he urgently needed good material for his next article. His editor was pressuring him, and he decided that this story about the mysterious house would be the perfect sensation to present to readers as a true report from the scene. Confident in himself and his abilities, he resolved to visit the house at night and find out what lay behind these myths. Preparing for the expedition, Maxim took only the essentials: a notebook, a voice recorder, and a small flashlight. He wasn't afraid of dark corridors or the warnings of locals. He was a journalist, a seeker of truth. The mansion loomed before him as he approached it late in the evening. The house looked even more sinister than he had imagined. Imposing columns and intricately carved doors, covered in cobwebs and dust, hinted at the former grandeur of the place. But something about it felt off. The air was heavy, saturated with dampness, and something that resembled rotting wood. Maxim stopped before the door. His hand trembled as he touched the massive door handle, not out of fear, but from some instinctive feeling that he was making a mistake. However, his mind was firm. He would enter, examine the house, and leave, just as he had done dozens of times before in other places. The door opened with a long, drawn-out creak. Inside, the house was even gloomier. The moonlight, filtering through the half-ruined shutters, only emphasized the darkness of the rooms. Maxim cautiously stepped on the creaking floorboards, glancing at the old furniture covered with a thick layer of dust. It felt as if time had stopped here. The air was filled with a strange silence, broken only by the occasional sound of his steps. The first half-hour passed uneventfully. Maxim walked through the rooms, taking notes and snapping photos. No ghosts, no strange noises. The house seemed quite ordinary, though eerily abandoned. But when he entered the central hall, something changed. In the center of the hall stood a grand, ornate staircase leading to the second floor. And then he heard it, the sound, like a whisper. Quiet, barely discernible, but unmistakably real. It wasn't the creaking of wood or the wind whistling through the corridors. It was words. And they were coming from above, from the depths of the mansion. Maxim froze, trying to determine where the sound was coming from. His heart quickened its pace. At first, he tried to convince himself that it was just his imagination playing tricks on him, but the sound repeated. The whisper grew louder. It came from deep within the house. Leaving logic behind, Maxim began to climb the stairs. The steps creaked beneath his feet, but it didn't stop him. He was determined to find out what was happening here. Reaching the second floor, he stopped before a long, dark corridor. The whisper was growing louder. These weren't just sounds, they were words, spoken in a language unfamiliar to him, yet imbued with an ancient power. The corridor seemed endless. Maxim walked forward, feeling as though something unseen was calling him. And then, without any warning, he realized he was no longer alone. The air became heavy, oppressive. And then he saw it. At the end of the corridor stood a figure. It was a person, or something resembling a person. Too tall, with elongated limbs and skin as pale as death. The creature's eyes glowed with a dark, yellowish light, and its mouth twisted into a silent grin. This was a guardian, and it wasn't alone. From the doors and shadows, other beings began to emerge, equally terrifying and deformed. There were many of them, and they moved toward Maxim without making a sound. It seemed their existence followed some other, inhuman logic. Instinctively, Maxim rushed back toward the staircase, but his legs felt as if they were filled with lead. He felt his strength leaving him and realized that the house wouldn't let him go. The guardians surrounded him, their distorted faces reaching out to him. They weren't evil in the usual sense. They were executors of the will of this place, its eternal inhabitants, protecting the secret that Maxim wasn't supposed to discover. The flashlight went out, and darkness consumed him. The last thing he heard was the whisper, just as quiet and endless as in the beginning. The house reclaimed its silence. No one knew what happened to Maxim. He simply disappeared, like so many before him. But those who passed by the mansion at night swore that sometimes they saw shadows in the windows and heard whispers coming from the depths of the house.